The day Earth officially joined the galactic community started with a bang. Literally. Ambassador Thomas Jenkins, representing humanity with all the grace of a caffeinated squirrel, accidentally discharged what he thought was a ceremonial pen. Turns out it was Commander Vrex's personal defense blaster. The resulting energy bolt didn't kill anyone, thankfully, but it did vaporize the Confederation's sacred treaty table, a 10,000-year-old relic carved from the fossilized brain of their first unified leader. So, no pressure. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for this incident. Jenkins stammered, sweat beading on his forehead as 6 different alien species stared at him with what he hoped was shock and not bloodlust. It was hard to tell with the Dravians, whose angry and pleased expressions both involved exposing rows of serrated teeth. Commander Vrex, a tall gaunt being with blue-tinted skin and 4 arms, all currently crossed in obvious displeasure, fixed Jenkins with 3 yellow eyes. The 4th eye remained closed, which Jenkins had learned meant extreme annoyance among the Zilthori. In 8,000 cycles of diplomatic service, Vrex said, voice like gravel in a coffee grinder, I have never witnessed such carelessness. Do all humans handle unknown technology with such reckless abandon? Before Jenkins could answer, Admiral Elena Thompson stepped forward. As the head of Earth's Space Force and the actual adult in the room, she smoothly interjected, Commander Vrex, we sincerely apologize. However, I must point out that leaving an unlocked weapon disguised as writing equipment at a diplomatic meeting violates Section 7 of your own Confederation security protocols. A murmur rippled through the assembled aliens. Vrex's 4th eye snapped open. You've read our protocols? Asked Gorban, a short round alien whose gelatinous body quivered with each word. All 12,000 pages, Thompson nodded. Twice. Also, your translation algorithm has 17 syntax errors. We fixed them for you. The aliens exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to plan. Humans were supposed to be the primitive newcomers, not the ones pointing out flaws in their systems. Commander Vrex cleared his throat, a sound like distant thunder. Regardless of protocols, this incident suggests humans may be too impulsive for Confederation membership. Perhaps you require further evaluation before formal admission. Evaluation, Jenkins squeaked, looking at Thompson with panicked eyes that clearly said please don't let them probe me. Yes, Vrex continued, warming to the idea. A demonstration of your species' ability to follow orders, exercise restraint, and respect established boundaries. The Confederation cannot risk admitting potentially dangerous species without proper assessment. Thompson's eyes narrowed. She'd expected some pushback, but this was beginning to sound like a setup. What kind of demonstration did you have in mind, Commander? Vrex's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile, though it looked more like someone had just told him his dinner was still alive. Something simple, a traditional combat challenge. One champion from Earth against one of ours, under controlled conditions of course. Purely ceremonial. Combat, Jenkins whispered. They can't be serious. But Thompson recognized the look in Vrex's 3 open eyes. He wasn't just serious, he was counting on humans failing spectacularly. We accept your challenge, Thompson declared, ignoring Jenkins's choked gasp. Name your terms. And that, as they say, was when the real trouble began. This is absolute madness. Dr. Howard Pierce whispered fiercely, as the Earth delegation huddled in their temporary quarters aboard the Confederation diplomatic vessel. We can't seriously be considering a combat challenge. We've barely mastered interstellar travel, and now we're going to fight aliens. Admiral Thompson remained infuriatingly calm, reviewing footage of previous Confederation combat challenges on her tablet. It's not as bad as it sounds. Their combat rituals are highly formalized, almost ceremonial. Think of it as aggressive ballet with occasional punching. Oh wonderful, Jenkins muttered. Maybe we can lose gracefully, and they'll only banish us from half the galaxy. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, who had been silently observing from the corner, stepped forward. I'll do it. All heads turned toward the compact, muscular woman. Standing at just 5'5", Rodriguez didn't look particularly intimidating, until you noticed the intensity in her dark eyes. Absolutely not, Dr. Pierce protested. We need to send someone with diplomatic training. Someone who can take a hit and keep going. Rodriguez interrupted. With all due respect, sir, that's me. 3-time Earth Forces combat champion. Plus I grew up wrestling alligators in the Florida Restoration Zone. Jenkins blinked. Is that a real place? The point is, Rodriguez continued, I know how to fight, and more importantly, I know how to keep fighting when everything hurts and I want to quit. Thompson studied Rodriguez thoughtfully. Are you familiar with marathon ultra fighting? The sport where people beat each other up for 12 hours straight. Yes, ma'am. Placed second in the Pan American division last year. Only second? Jenkins asked weakly. Rodriguez shrugged. Got distracted when my opponent's arm broke. Rookie mistake. Thompson nodded decisively. Lieutenant Rodriguez is our champion. 3 hours later they assembled in what the aliens called the Chamber of Civilized Resolution, a massive amphitheater surrounded by tiered seating filled with representatives from 24 species. The arena floor was padded with something that resembled blue moss which apparently absorbed impact energy to prevent serious injuries. Commander Vrex approached with another alien in tow, a behemoth with leathery gray skin, standing nearly 8 feet tall with limbs like tree trunks. This is Krell, champion of the Drezak people and defender of Confederation honor. He has graciously agreed to represent us in this challenge. Rodriguez looked up, way up at her opponent and gave a polite nod. Krell responded with a rumbling sound that might have been a greeting or indigestion. Before we begin, Vrex continued, you should understand the rules of civilized combat. He gestured to a floating holographic display showing a complicated schedule. Combat proceeds in 12 segments of 7 minutes each with mandatory 3-minute rest periods between segments. Medical assessment occurs after segments 4 and 8. Rodriguez frowned. Rest periods. Of course, Vrex replied, blinking all 4 eyes simultaneously in surprise. All sentient beings require recovery intervals during physical exertion. It's biologically necessary. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged a look. During rest periods, combatants must cease all activity, consume hydration supplements, and allow their autonomic systems to recalibrate. Vrex continued. Victory is achieved when one combatant can no longer continue or concedes. What if neither of us gives up? Rodriguez asked. Vrex made a clicking sound that their translators didn't catch. That has never occurred. Combat naturally reaches equilibrium when exertion limits are met. Rodriguez smiled. It wasn't a particularly friendly smile. Interesting. As they prepared to begin, Krell lumbered over to Rodriguez and spoke directly to her for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle for his size. I will try not to damage you permanently, small human. When you feel your limit approaching, there is no dishonor in yielding. Rodriguez tied her hair back in a tight ponytail and stretched her shoulders. That's very considerate. I'll keep it in mind. Thompson placed a hand on Rodriguez's shoulder. Remember, this is about proving humans can follow rules and protocols. No need to go overboard. I know, Rodriguez nodded. Don't worry, Admiral, I'll be the perfect example of human restraint. As Thompson walked away, she couldn't help noticing the gleam in Rodriguez's eye, the same look she'd seen in Special Forces operators right before they did something either incredibly brave or exceptionally stupid. Usually both. A melodic chime resonated through the Chamber of Civilized Resolution, signaling the start of the combat challenge. Rodriguez bounced lightly on the balls of her feet, sizing up her massive opponent as Krell performed what appeared to be a ritual stretching sequence, his enormous limbs moving with surprising grace. Begin first segment, announced a disembodied voice, and the blue moss beneath their feet glowed slightly. Krell moved forward with deliberate steps, arms raised in a traditional fighting stance. Rodriguez circled cautiously, keeping her distance while studying his movement patterns. Human, Krell rumbled, approach so we may engage properly. Rodriguez darted in, feinted left, then delivered a quick strike to Krell's midsection before dancing away. The impact seemed to surprise the alien more than hurt him. Interesting technique, Krell noted. But combat requires sustained engagement. The next minute passed with Krell attempting to close distance while Rodriguez employed hit-and-run tactics. The alien spectators began murmuring among themselves. The human appears confused about proper combat protocol, observed a jellyfish-like being floating in a hovering tank. Commander Vrex leaned toward Admiral Thompson in the diplomatic viewing box. Your champion seems reluctant to engage. Perhaps she is reconsidering her participation. Thompson smiled thinly. Lieutenant Rodriguez is just warming up. As if on cue, Rodriguez finally stepped into Krell's reach. The massive alien seized the opportunity, swinging a powerful arm that would have sent most opponents flying. Instead, Rodriguez ducked under the blow and delivered 3 rapid strikes to Krell's exposed side before pivoting away. For the remainder of the first segment, they exchanged blows in earnest. Krell's attacks powerful but predictable, Rodriguez's quicker and precisely targeted. When the chime sounded again, both combatants were breathing harder. "Cease combat. Begin mandatory rest period," the announcer intoned. Krell immediately stopped and walked to his designated recovery area, where attendants offered hydration and performed quick medical scans. Rodriguez, however, continued bouncing on her toes, rolling her shoulders. A concerned murmur rippled through the alien audience. "Human champion," called an official. "You must cease physical activity during the rest interval. It is mandatory." Rodriguez looked genuinely confused. "I'm just staying loose, not actually fighting." "All muscular exertion must pause for recovery," the official insisted. "Please lie down on your recovery platform." With a shrug, Rodriguez complied, though she continued to flex and stretch her fingers while lying down. The medical technician hovering over her looked increasingly distressed as he studied her readings. "Is there a problem?" Thompson called from the viewing box. "Her cardiovascular and respiratory systems are still in accelerated mode," the technician replied. "She has not activated her recovery state." Thompson suppressed a smile. "Humans don't have an on-demand recovery state." The technician's eyes widened. "Then how does she regulate metabolic functions during combat?" "She doesn't. She just keeps going." Before the implications of this could sink in, the chime sounded again. "Rest period complete. Begin second segment." As Rodriguez bounded back to the center of the arena, Krell approached more cautiously this time. The pattern repeated through the second and third segments, intense exchanges of blows followed by rest periods that Rodriguez clearly found unnecessary. By the fourth segment, a noticeable shift had occurred. Krell's movements, while still powerful, had slowed perceptibly. Rodriguez, meanwhile, maintained her pace, even increasing her offensive pressure. "The human shows no signs of fatigue accumulation," whispered one official to Commander Vrex. "Is this normal for their species?" Vrex's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied Rodriguez. "They must have some biological mechanism we don't understand. All sentient life requires recovery cycles." When the mandatory medical assessment came after the fourth segment, the alien technicians clustered around Rodriguez with increasing confusion. "Her lactic acid levels should be inhibiting muscle function by now," one technician said, waving a scanner over her limbs. "Yet they appear to be metabolizing at an accelerated rate." "Maybe she has implants," suggested another. "Artificial enhancement systems." Rodriguez laughed. "Nope, just good old-fashioned human biology." Across the arena, Krell was breathing heavily, receiving more intensive treatment from his medical team, though no one would say it aloud. The mighty alien champion was showing unmistakable signs of exhaustion. As they prepared to resume for the fifth segment, Jenkins leaned toward Thompson in the viewing box. "Is it just me, or is our supposedly primitive species making them nervous?" Thompson watched as Rodriguez stretched casually, while Krell required assistance returning to the combat area. "I believe, Ambassador, they're beginning to realize they've made a terrible mistake." The chime sounded again, and Rodriguez stepped forward with the same energy she'd shown in the first segment. Krell, however, moved with visible effort, his previous grace now replaced by determined but labored movements. "Fifth segment," Rodriguez called cheerfully to her opponent. "Ready to pick up the pace a bit?" Krell stared at her with what might have been a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "You are not normal." Rodriguez grinned. "Oh buddy, you have no idea." By the sixth segment, the entire Confederation delegation was in various states of distress. Krell, their mighty champion, was visibly struggling. His powerful strikes had become sluggish, his breath coming in labored wheezes that the translators couldn't quite process. Sweat, or whatever passed for it in his species, coated his gray skin in a slick purplish sheen. Rodriguez, on the other hand, looked like she was just hitting her stride. "Is this really necessary?" Krell gasped after Rodriguez landed a particularly effective combination. "We have established the ceremonial nature of this combat." "Giving up?" Rodriguez asked, bouncing on her toes as though they hadn't been fighting for nearly an hour. "Absolutely not," Krell rumbled, though even his voice lacked conviction. "I merely suggest a mutually respectful conclusion." Rodriguez grinned. "We've got 6 more segments to go, big guy. Let's not skip to the end." In the diplomatic viewing box, the alien delegates were frantically consulting with their medical and scientific advisors. "How is this possible?" hissed a reptilian diplomat with translucent scales. "The human shows minimal fatigue response." Has she disabled her biological limiters? Humans don't have biological limiters, Dr. Pierce explained, unable to keep the pride from his voice. At least, not in the way you're thinking. All sentient life has evolved shutdown protocols, insisted the Confederation's chief biologist, a spindly being with oversized eyes. Without them, a species would damage itself through overexertion. Yeah, we do that sometimes, Jenkins admitted with a shrug. We call it Tuesday. The seventh segment was when things truly fell apart. Midway through, Krell stumbled, his massive frame faltering as Rodriguez darted around him, landing strikes that now left visible marks. The alien medical team at the sidelines was becoming increasingly agitated. His core temperature is approaching critical range, one technician reported loudly enough for everyone to hear. Why isn't his emergency shutdown activating? Commander Vex stood abruptly, paused the combat. Medical intervention is required. The official overseer hesitated. But Commander, that would violate the sacred protocols of, do it now. Vex barked, all four eyes wide with alarm. As the chime sounded prematurely, Rodriguez stepped back, watching curiously as medical personnel swarmed around Krell. The giant alien had dropped to one knee, his breathing ragged. What's happening? Rodriguez asked, not even winded. Is he okay? The chief medical officer, a being with too many limbs to count easily, turned to her with what appeared to be accusation in its compound eyes. His body should have activated emergency shutdown protocols by now. Something is preventing it. Maybe he's just pushing through, Rodriguez suggested. You know, mind over matter. Impossible, the medical officer stated flatly. No sentient being can override their biological safety systems without technological intervention. The officer narrowed its many eyes. Where is your off switch, human? Rodriguez blinked. My what now? Your combat termination mechanism, the officer clarified, growing more agitated. The biological system that prevents catastrophic damage during physical exertion. Rodriguez looked to Thompson and Pierce, confusion evident on her face. Thompson stepped forward, her diplomatic experience barely containing her amusement. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Thompson explained. Humans don't have an off switch for combat or physical exertion. A shocked murmur rippled through the alien observers. That's biologically impossible, protested the medical officer. All evolved species develop shutdown protocols to prevent self-destruction. It's a fundamental survival mechanism. Well, we kind of evolved differently, Pierce offered. Humans develop persistence hunting. We literally chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. You pursue prey until its shutdown protocols activate. The medical officer's voice rose in pitch. That's not hunting. That's terrifying, Jenkins suggested helpfully. We do have limits, Rodriguez interjected, trying to be reassuring. We eventually get tired. It just takes a while. She glanced at Krell, who was now receiving some kind of emergency treatment. A lot longer than your guy, apparently. Commander Vex approached, his four eyes blinking in an unsynchronized pattern that suggested extreme distress. This combat challenge must be suspended immediately. There has clearly been a procedural incompatibility. Are you forfeiting? Thompson asked innocently. We are acknowledging a biological incongruity that makes standard combat protocols inapplicable, Vex replied stiffly. This is not a concession, it is a medical necessity. As medical technicians hustled Krell from the arena on a floating stretcher, Rodriguez stood alone in the center, still bouncing slightly on her toes. So, did we win? She called to Thompson. The Admiral's diplomatic smile couldn't quite hide her satisfaction. I believe, Lieutenant, we've made quite an impression. The aftermath of the combat challenge played out in the Confederation's Grand Council chamber, where representatives from 27 spacefaring civilizations gathered in barely contained uproar. The massive circular room buzzed with overlapping translator outputs as dozens of species tried to speak simultaneously. Commander Vex stood at the central podium, all four of his eyes open but narrowed in clear agitation. Order, the Council will have order. Gradually the cacophony subsided. The Earth delegation, Thompson, Jenkins, Pierce, and a remarkably refreshed-looking Rodriguez, stood on the presentation platform, surrounded by suspicious stares. The Confederation has convened this emergency session to address the irregularities in today's combat challenge, Vex announced. His voice carried a formal tone that barely masked his accusation. We have reason to believe the human representatives have engaged in biological deception. Excuse me. Thompson stepped forward, her diplomatic veneer slipping. What exactly are you suggesting, Commander? Vex gestured to a holographic display showing Rodriguez's biometric readings during combat. These readings are impossible for an evolved sentient species. Your champion demonstrated no progressive fatigue response, no metabolic regulation, and most disturbingly, he paused dramatically, no pain-induced activity cessation. You mean she didn't stop when it hurt? Pierce translated flatly. Precisely. Vex's voice rose. All civilized species possess neurological limiters that prevent self-destructive physical exertion. The absence of such limiters indicates either artificial manipulation or, he hesitated, a fundamentally dangerous evolutionary path. The council chamber erupted again. A serpentine delegate rose on coiled appendages. They've weaponized their own biology. This violates the non-modification treaty of the 7th Galactic Concordat. We haven't modified anything. Thompson countered. Human endurance is completely natural. A small avian alien with iridescent feathers fluttered nervously. But why would evolution produce a species without safety protocols? It defies all biological principles. Dr. Pierce stepped forward, slipping automatically into his lecturing mode. Actually, it makes perfect evolutionary sense for our planet. Earth's early humans were persistence predators. We lack the natural weapons of other species: no claws, minimal strength compared to our body-sized dull teeth. What we developed instead was endurance. He brought up his own display showing primitive humans pursuing prey across a savanna. We would literally chase animals until they collapsed from heat exhaustion or fatigue. While other predators evolved for the quick kill, we evolved to just not stop. The council chamber had grown unnervingly quiet. You pursued living creatures until their biological safety systems activated, forcing shutdown, summarized a gelatinous being from the upper tier, its translator rendering its voice in horrified tones, and then, while they were helpless, you consumed them. Jenkins winced. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound a bit exactly how it was, Rodriguez interrupted with a shrug. We're persistence predators. We don't have an off switch because stopping before our prey stopped would mean starvation. This also explains your behavior during the rest periods, Vex realized, his skin taking on a paler blue. You weren't being difficult. You genuinely don't require recovery intervals. We recover, of course, Thompson clarified. Just continuously. While still moving. While still fighting, corrected a military representative from the back of the chamber. Or hunting. Or pursuing. The alien made a gesture that didn't need translation. It was clearly meant to indicate alarm. Commander Vex seemed to be processing this information with growing concern. You realize what this means for your species classification, don't you? Under Confederation guidelines, any species with unregulated combat capabilities must be designated as Category 3, potentially destabilizing. That's ridiculous, Thompson objected. We followed every rule of your combat challenge. The fact that we're naturally more endurance-oriented doesn't make us dangerous, doesn't it? Vex countered. A species that continues fighting beyond all rational biological limits, that pursues prey until collapse rather than engaging in energy-efficient hunting strategies, that views pain as an optional signal, Rodriguez snorted. Pain isn't optional, it just doesn't always get a vote. This statement did nothing to reassure the council. Perhaps offered a diplomatic representative with crystalline features, we should consider that different evolutionary paths produce different biological imperatives. The humans appear to have developed their unusual capabilities through natural selection, not artificial enhancement. Precisely, Thompson seized on this lifeline. Humans have achieved technological advancement and peaceful civilization despite, or perhaps because of, our biological makeup. We're not asking for special treatment, just recognition that diversity in evolutionary paths shouldn't be grounds for exclusion. A thoughtful murmur passed through the chamber. Vex's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign that he was considering this perspective. There is precedent, noted an elder council member. The Thraxi evolve without optical sensory limitations, yet we don't classify their ability to perceive the full electromagnetic spectrum as dangerous. The Thraxi can't chase you until you collapse from exhaustion, muttered another delegate, though the translators discreetly muted this comment. Vex raised his 4 arms for silence. This council must determine whether humanity's biological peculiarities are compatible with Confederation principles. We will require further study and observation before rendering final judgment. As the delegates began discussing testing protocols and observation periods, Jenkins leaned toward Thompson. So we're not getting kicked out of the galaxy yet. Thompson's eyes remained fixed on Vrex. Not yet, but I think we've given them something much more valuable than fear. What's that? Rodriguez asked. Thompson's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. Respect. 3 weeks after what Confederation media had dubbed the Endurance Incident, Earth's diplomatic situation had undergone a transformation that even the most optimistic human negotiator couldn't have predicted. What began as potential exclusion from galactic society had evolved into something between cautious respect and outright fascination. The Confederation's Central Archives, a sprawling complex on their capital world of Nexus Prime, had never seen such traffic. Xenobiologists, military strategists, and cultural anthropologists from 24 species crowded the newly established Human Studies section, poring over the limited data available on Earth's unusual inhabitants. I still don't understand, muttered Grax, a senior Zilthori scientist, as he studied footage of human marathon runners. They continue long after pain signals should force cessation. It's as if they've evolved to ignore their own biological warning systems. Not ignore, corrected Dr. Pierce, who had become something of a reluctant celebrity among Confederation academics. Humans process pain differently. We acknowledge it, but we can choose to continue despite it. Choose? The concept seemed to disturb Grax profoundly. Pain is not supposed to be optional. That's the entire point of pain, to prevent further damage. Pierce shrugged. For humans, survival sometimes meant pushing through pain. Those who could do so passed on their genes. Across the room, Admiral Thompson was engaged in a more formal discussion with the Confederation Security Council. Unlike the scientists' intellectual curiosity, these military leaders viewed humanity with strategic caution. You must understand our concerns, General Culver rumbled, his exoskeleton clicking as he shifted positions. A species that continues fighting beyond rational limits introduces unpredictable variables into conflict resolution protocols. I would argue it makes us very predictable, Thompson countered. We persist. That's consistent and dependable. Yes, but for how long? Asked another security official. What is the upper threshold of human persistence? At what point do you actually stop? Thompson considered this. It varies by individual and circumstance. Under extreme conditions, humans have been known to continue physical activity for days with minimal rest. The security officials exchanged alarmed glances, but Thompson added quickly, we're not mindless automatons. We make rational decisions about when to stop, based on strategic considerations. So you're saying, General Culver clarified, that you can choose to ignore your biological limitations when it serves your purposes, but you're also capable of rational de-escalation. Exactly. That's even more concerning, muttered someone at the back of the room. Meanwhile, in what the Confederation considered their equivalent of recreational facilities, Lieutenant Rodriguez was discovering that fame in galactic society came with unusual challenges. Ever since the combat challenge, she had been approached by curious aliens wherever she went, often with questions that ranged from scientifically precise to borderline offensive. Is it true humans can regrow severed limbs? Asked a wide-eyed Thraxi youth. No, that's salamanders, Rodriguez corrected patiently. We just heal regular wounds. But you can continue fighting with multiple fractures, pressed another alien. We can, but it's not recommended. Look, we're not invincible. We just don't have automatic shutdown systems. The concept seemed to simultaneously fascinate and horrify her audience. One braver soul finally asked the question that had been circulating through Confederation gossip channels. Is it accurate that humans engage in voluntary physical suffering as recreation? Rodriguez laughed. You mean sports and exercise? Yeah, that's true. We actually seek out physical challenges for fun. This confession nearly caused a diplomatic incident all over again. Back in the main diplomatic chamber, Ambassador Jenkins was putting the finishing touches on what would become known as the Human Protocols, a comprehensive agreement establishing Earth's unique status within the Confederation. Commander Vrex, who had gradually shifted from suspicion to grudging admiration, reviewed the final document. These terms are acceptable, Vrex confirmed, all 4 eyes focused on the text. Earth will be granted full Confederation membership with special classification as a Category 2A civilization, EVA-lush, narrowly divergent but non-hostile. Jenkins could hardly contain his relief. And our people will be free to travel Confederation space without restrictions. With certain advisories, Vrex clarified. All establishments must be informed of human biological capabilities, particularly the absence of automatic fatigue protocols. That seems reasonable, Jenkins agreed, though he wondered how humans would feel about essentially wearing warning labels in galactic society. There is one additional matter, Vrex added, his tone shifting to something almost resembling concern. The Confederation Council has requested that Lieutenant Rodriguez consider serving as a cultural liaison. Her demonstration of human capabilities has made her something of a poor Rodriguez, Jenkins murmured. From combat specialist to interstellar diplomat, overnight. Is this arrangement unacceptable? Vrex inquired, uncertain of Jenkins' reaction. No, Jenkins clarified quickly. It's just that fame isn't always comfortable for humans either. We may not have biological off-switches, but we do value our privacy. Vrex's expression registered what might have been his species' version of understanding. Perhaps this is another human trait we should study, the capacity to find discomfort in attention rather than just physical strain. Later that evening, the Earth delegation gathered in their temporary quarters to celebrate their diplomatic victory. The room had been decorated with both Earth and Confederation symbols, a visual representation of their new galactic standing. To Lieutenant Rodriguez, Thompson toasted, raising a glass of what the Confederation had assured them was compatible with human biology, whose stubborn refusal to get tired has rewritten our place in the galaxy. Rodriguez groaned. Please stop. The last thing I need is to become the poster child for human endurance. Too late, Pierce laughed. I heard they're adding a section on human persistence phenomena to the Confederation educational curriculum. You're officially a teaching tool. Wonderful, Rodriguez muttered. All I did was not get tired during a fight. It's not exactly groundbreaking. To them it is, Thompson reminded her. You've single-handedly reshaped their understanding of biological evolution. Every species they've encountered until now has evolved with built-in limitations, off-switches that prevent self-destruction. And we're the weird ones for not having them. Jenkins added cheerfully. Speaking of weird, Pierce interjected, scrolling through his datapad. The Confederation scientists have been compiling a list of other concerning human traits they've discovered in their research. Want to hear? Do we have a choice? Rodriguez asked. Apparently we can tolerate capsaicin spicy food, which is technically a pain response that we interpret as pleasure. They're worried about our hot sauce. Jenkins laughed. They're classifying it as voluntary chemical pain induction for recreational purposes. Pierce read. Also on the list. Our ability to form social bonds with other species, our tendency to anthropomorphize inanimate objects, and my personal favorite, our habit of responding to threats with either aggression or adoption, with seemingly no predictable pattern. Adopt threats, Rodriguez frowned. They found records of humans keeping venomous snakes as pets, Thompson explained. Apparently most species avoid things that can kill them rather than naming them and feeding them mice. Jenkins looked thoughtful. You know, from their perspective we must seem absolutely terrifying. A species that doesn't stop when exhausted, actively seeks out pain through spicy food and exercise, and occasionally decides deadly predators are cute and should live in our homes. And yet, Thompson noted, they're still willing to welcome us into their confederation. With appropriate warning labels, Rodriguez added dryly. It's a start, Thompson said, raising her glass again. To humanity, the species without an off switch. To persistence, Pierce joined in. To scaring the hell out of the galaxy, Jenkins added with a grin. Rodriguez finally smiled, raising her own glass. To being the weird ones. May it always keep the galaxy guessing. Unbeknownst to the celebrating humans, their conversation was being monitored with their knowledge and consent, as per Confederation diplomatic protocols. Commander Vrex, reviewing the transcript in his private chamber, found himself experiencing an unfamiliar emotion as he considered these strange enduring creatures, and their place in the galactic community. It wasn't fear, though there was certainly cause for it. It wasn't respect, though they had earned that. No, what Vrex felt was something closer to wonder. These humans with their biological peculiarities and their incomprehensible persistence, had introduced something the ancient Confederation hadn't experienced in millennia: unpredictability. As he authorized Earth's final membership documents, Vrex made a personal note in his private log: humanity represents a fundamental challenge to established understanding of evolutionary development. Their lack of biological limiters should be concerning, yet their capacity for restraint, despite this ability, suggests a level of self-regulation that transcends pure biological imperatives. Most disturbing of all, they seem genuinely unaware of how unusual they are. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Perhaps the greatest danger humans pose is not their persistence in combat, but their persistent belief that the impossible is merely difficult. This may prove either the Confederation's greatest asset, or its most significant challenge in the millennia to come. With a gesture, Vrex closed his log and gazed out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a planet of beings who didn't know when to quit. The galaxy, he suspected, would never be quite the same again. Neither would the humans, for that matter. Being classified as the galaxy's unstoppable persistence predators would certainly change their self-perception. Vrex only hoped they would use this new understanding wisely. After all, a species without an off switch needed to be very careful about when they decided to turn themselves on.